Betrayal burns hotter than any fire, but ice always claims the forgotten. Abandoned during the catastrophic 1883 Montana blizzard by a cowardly husband who stole their only horse, Halo prepared to freeze. Just as her heartbeat faded into silence, a mysterious stranger violently kicked down her cabin door. The wind howling through the Bitterroot Valley did not sound like a mere storm. It sounded like the wailing of the damned. It was late November of 1883, a year that would go down in local history for a winter so vicious it froze cattle standing upright in the fields. For Halo Miller, the biting frost creeping through the poorly chinked logs of her isolated homestead was nothing compared to the ice that had just settled over her heart. Halo was a woman bred for the polite drawing rooms of Saint-Yemo-Crast. Louis, not the unforgiving frontier of Montana territory. She had followed her husband, Josiah Miller, on a promise of Western prosperity. Josiah was a man of grand, sweeping gestures and smooth words. But the frontier had a brutal way of stripping away a man's veneer to reveal the timber underneath. Josiah's timber was rotten. As the first flakes of the great white hurricane began to fall, turning the sky a bruised, violent purple, panic had seized him. "I have to ride to Abernathy's trading post," Josiah had said, his voice trembling as he hastily shoved extra woolen blankets into his leather saddlebags. His eyes, usually so full of arrogant confidence, were wide and shifting, unable to meet his wife's gaze. "We don't have enough firewood, Abby. We don't have enough flour. I'll ride out, get supplies, and bring back help before the passes close." Halo had stood near the hearth, shivering in her thin shawl, watching him with a growing sense of dread. "Josiah, the sky is black. You can't leave now. The snow is already drifting past the porch. We can break down the dining table for firewood. Please, do not leave me alone. I am the man of this house, and I know what is best." He had snapped, the mask slipping entirely. He didn't take the small saddlebags. He took the massive canvas panniers. He didn't just take his coat, he took hers, claiming he needed the extra layer to survive the ride, and would return with a thicker buffalo robe. He took the only rifle. He took the last tin of matches, slipping them into his pocket with a practiced sleight of hand. He thought she hadn't noticed. When the heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him, the finality of the sound echoed in Halo's chest. She rushed to the frost-rimed window, rubbing a small circle through the ice, just in time to see Josiah galloping eastward on their only horse, vanishing into the blinding white wall of snow. He wasn't going to Abernathy's post. Abernathy's was to the west. He was heading toward the railway station in Missoula. He had left her to die. For the first 24 hours, Halo fought. She was a woman abandoned, but she was not yet a ghost. When the meager pile of firewood beside the hearth dwindled to splinters, she took Josiah's heavy iron skillet and began smashing the wooden dining chairs, feeding the fractured mahogany into the dying flames. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted with terrifying speed. The water in the wash basin froze solid by the second afternoon. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, driving needles of snow directly into the living room. By the third day, the fire died. Halo's hands were too numb, too bruised to break apart the heavy oak table. She scoured the cabin for the spare matches, tearing through the cupboards and floorboards. But Josiah had been thorough. He hadn't just left in a panic. He had orchestrated a silent murder. Halo retreated to the bed in the corner of the room, dragging every remaining quilt, rug, and piece of clothing over her trembling body. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on her lungs. Her fingers and toes lost their agonizing ache, transitioning into a terrifying, hollow numbness. She closed her eyes, the edges of her vision darkening with a strange, lethargic warmth. The pain was fading. A dangerous, sleep-heavy peace began to wash over her. She dreamt of her childhood garden in Missouri, of the warm summer sun on her face, unaware that the brutal Montana frost was slowing her heart to a deadly crawl. Outside, the snowdrifts buried the windows. The cabin was a silent tomb, waiting to claim its tenant. Cole Remington was not a man easily deterred by the elements, but even he knew that being caught in the Bitterroot blizzard was a fool's errand. A former lawman with a shadowed past, he preferred not to discuss. Cole owned a sprawling, successful cattle ranch 3 miles up the ridge from the Miller property. He was riding a massive, sure-footed draft cross named Goliath, fighting his way through waist-deep snowdrifts to locate a breach in his southern fence line. Through the blinding, swirling white, Cole caught sight of a snowbank that looked too unnaturally square to be a trick of the wind. It was the roof of a cabin, completely buried, save for the stone chimney. Cole pulled his bandana down from his frozen face, his sharp, pale eyes narrowing against the stinging wind. No smoke. In weather like this, a cold chimney meant only one of 2 things: the occupants had abandoned the property, or they were dead inside. Cole knew of the couple who had recently bought the parcel, a city slicker named Josiah, who talked too loud at the saloon, and a quiet, sad-eyed wife who rarely came into town. Cole hesitated. It wasn't his business, but the creeping feeling in his gut, a leftover instinct from his badge-wearing days, spurred him forward. He spurred Goliath toward the buried cabin, dismounting into chest-high snow. Cole used a fallen pine branch to dig his way to the front door. He hammered a heavy, leather-gloved fist against the wood. "Hello, the house," he roared over the howling wind. "Nothing." Cole stepped back, raised his heavy, snow-caked boot, and kicked the door with the force of a mule. The frozen latch shattered, and the door burst open in a cloud of ice and splintered wood. The interior of the cabin was a dark, frozen cavern. The air inside was colder than the air outside, trapped and stagnant. Cole drew his revolver on instinct, scanning the gloom. The place was wrecked, shattered chairs, emptied cupboards, frost coating the walls like a crystalline fungus. And then he saw the mound of blankets on the bed. He holstered his weapon and crossed the room in 3 massive strides, pulling back a stiff, frozen quilt. Beneath it lay Halo. Her skin was a terrifying, translucent shade of blue. Her lips were cracked and pale, her eyelashes heavy with white frost. Cole swore under his breath, dropping to his knees. He pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her icy neck. For a long, agonizing moment, he felt nothing. Then, a pulse so faint and erratic, it felt like the flutter of a dying moth. She was in the final stages of hypothermia. Moving her to his ranch in this storm would kill her instantly. He had to act now, or she wouldn't last the hour. Cole's survival instincts took over. He practically sprinted out to Goliath, retrieving his saddlebags, his heavy canvas tarp, a dry bundle of kindling he always kept wrapped in oilcloth, and his axe. Within minutes, he had reduced the heavy oak dining table to firewood. He struck a match from his waterproof tin, nursing a tiny spark into a roaring, life-saving blaze in the stone hearth. But the ambient heat wouldn't be enough to penetrate the deep freeze in Halo's core. She was fully dressed, but her clothes were damp from melted frost and frozen stiff, acting as an icebox against her skin. Cole knew the brutal mathematics of survival. Modesty had no place in a graveyard. With swift, clinical efficiency, Cole peeled away the heavy, frozen layers of Halo's dresses and petticoats until she was bare to the freezing air. He dragged the thick mattress off the bed frame and positioned it directly in front of the roaring hearth. He laid her gently upon it, covering her immediately with his own dry, heavy buffalo hide coat. Next, Cole stripped off his own snow-soaked duster, his heavy woolen shirt, and his damp thermals. He slid beneath the heavy buffalo hide, pulling Halo's rigid, freezing body directly against his own warm, muscular chest. The shock of her cold skin against his nearly made him gasp. She felt like marble. Cole wrapped his arms tightly around her, trapping her within the cocoon of his body heat and the heavy animal hide. "Come on, darling," Cole whispered gruffly, rubbing his hands vigorously up and down her icy spine, transferring his life force into her. "Don't you quit on me. You don't get to die in this miserable shack. Breathe." For hours, the cabin was filled only with the popping of the sap in the firewood and the shrieking wind outside. Cole lay awake, holding the stranger, continuously massaging her limbs to stimulate blood flow, feeding the fire with his free hand whenever the flames dipped. Sometime past midnight, the terrifying rigidity in Halo's muscles began to give way. A violent, agonizing shivering overtook her body, a miraculous sign that her nervous system was fighting its way back from the brink of death. She whimpered, a small, broken sound of sheer agony as blood forced its way back into her frozen extremities. I know it hurts," Cole murmured, his deep, gravelly voice a steady anchor in the dark. He held her tighter, absorbing her tremors. "Let it hurt. The pain means you're alive." By dawn, the storm had finally broken. The pale, weak light of morning filtered through the frosted windows. Halo slowly opened her eyes. Her vision was blurry, her mind clouded with confusion. The first thing she registered was the overwhelming heat of the fire. The second was the heavy, rhythmic thumping of a heart beneath her ear. She stiffened, a gasp escaping her throat as she realized she was bare, wrapped in heavy furs, and pressed flush against the bare chest of a massive, heavily scarred stranger. "Easy now," Cole said, his voice gentle but firm as he felt her panic. He slowly loosened his grip, giving her space to pull the buffalo hide up to her chin. "You were dead to rights when I found you. The cold had you. I'm Cole Remington. I ranch up the ridge." Halo scrambled backward slightly, clutching the fur tight, her eyes wide and fearful. She looked around the cabin, the memories of Josiah's betrayal crashing over her like an avalanche. "My husband," she choked out, her throat raw and dry. "Josiah." "I didn't see any husband," Cole said, sitting up. He turned his back to her to offer her privacy as he pulled his dry thermal shirt over his broad shoulders. Saw a set of tracks heading east before the snow covered them completely. "East is the rail line, Mum. Not the trading post." Halo buried her face in her hands, a ragged sob tearing from her chest. "He left me. He took the matches. He took my coat." Cole's jaw tightened. A dark, dangerous anger flared in his eyes. Leaving someone in a blizzard was cowardice. Taking their means of survival was murder. He stood up, fully dressed now, and walked over to the corner of the room to search for something to boil snow in for coffee. As he nudged a pile of debris with his boot, he noticed a loose floorboard near the pantry. Crouching down, Cole pried the board up with his hunting knife. Beneath it lay a hollowed-out space in the dirt foundation. Inside was a shattered metal lockbox. "Mrs. Miller," Cole said softly, pulling a crumpled, discarded piece of parchment from the dirt. He walked back to the hearth, holding it out to her. "Did your husband have debts?" Halo looked up, wiping her tears. She took the paper. It was a heavily amended deed to her family's estate in Missouri, the only asset she had left to her name. Across the bottom, stamped in stark red ink, was a foreclosure notice from the St. Louis Bank, heavily tied to the notorious Reynolds gambling syndicate. "He didn't just abandon you." "Halo," Cole said, his voice low and dangerous as the pieces fell into place. "The lockbox is busted open from the inside. He stole whatever cash was in there, took your horse, and left you to freeze so the syndicate couldn't claim the property from a living spouse." Halo stared at the document, the shivering returning this time. Not from the cold, but from the horrifying realization of her husband's depravity. Josiah hadn't just run from the storm. He had sold her life for a train ticket out of Montana. Cole knelt beside the hearth, tossing another log onto the fire. The flames illuminated the hard, unyielding lines of his face. He looked at the fragile, betrayed woman wrapped in his coat. "He thinks you're a ghost by now," Cole said softly, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "But you're not. And when the pass is clear, we're going to ride to Missoula. Because a man who leaves his wife to freeze shouldn't get to enjoy the warmth of a fire ever again." Recovery was not a gentle process. It was a brutal, agonizing climb back to the land of the living. For 2 weeks, Halo remained sequestered at Cole Remington's sprawling ridgetop ranch. The frost had retreated from her skin, leaving behind a map of mottled, painful bruises. But the deepest scars were the ones no poultice could heal. Cole proved to be a man of stark contrasts. He possessed the rough, calloused hands of a cattleman, yet he tended to her with a quiet, clinical grace. He boiled willow bark for her pain, shot fresh grouse for broth, and never once pressed her to speak before she was ready. He moved through his massive log home with a heavy, purposeful tread, a constant, reassuring presence that grounded her when the phantom chill of the cabin threatened to drag her back into the dark. One evening, as a fresh snow fell softly outside the frosted window panes, Halo sat by the hearth in one of Cole's oversized flannel shirts. The warmth of the fire no longer felt like a sudden shock. It felt like a shield. "He planned it for months," Halo said, her voice finally breaking the long silence between them. She stared into the embers, her jaw set. "Josiah, he didn't just panic when the storm hit. He brought me out here to die." Cole paused in his task of oiling his Winchester rifle. He looked up, his pale eyes catching the firelight. "The deed to your family's estate in Missouri. He needed you out of the picture to sell it free and clear to the Reynolds syndicate." Halo nodded slowly. "My father was a stubborn man. He left the property solely in my name, with a strict clause it could only be sold if I signed the transfer, or in the event of my death. It would pass to my husband. Josiah had gambling debts in St. Louis, bad ones. Men came to our house in the middle of the night. He told me the frontier was a fresh start, a place to build a cattle empire." She let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "I was a fool. He brought me out to the Bitterroot Valley because it's the easiest place in the country to disappear. A blizzard is a perfect, bloodless assassin." Cole set the rifle down on the scarred oak table. He walked over to a heavy iron safe in the corner of the room, dialing the combination with practiced ease. He pulled out a leather ledger and a stack of telegraph receipts. "I did some digging in town before the storm hit," Cole said, handing her a yellowed slip of paper. "I used to ride as a federal marshal out of Cheyenne before I bought this land. Old habits die hard when new neighbors move in. I had the telegraph operator in Missoula pull the incoming wires for Josiah Miller." Halo took the slip. Her hands trembled as she read the typewritten words. Dated 3 days before the Blizzard transfer pending. Awaiting confirmation of widowhood. Carmichael in Missoula. To finalize Pargo. Reynolds. "Harrison Carmichael," Cole supplied, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravel. "He's a fixer for the St. Louis banks. He handles the dirty paper for the syndicates. Josiah wasn't running to the rail line to escape the snow. Halo. He was riding to Missoula to meet Carmichael. He knew the storm was coming. He used it." The paper crumpled in Halo's fist. The sadness that had weighed her down for weeks evaporated, replaced by a sudden, white-hot fury. Josiah had not just broken her heart, he had calculated her expiration date. He was sitting in a warm hotel room, drinking whiskey bought with her father's money, playing the tragic, grieving widower. She looked up at Cole, her eyes no longer wide and fearful, but hardened like tempered steel. "The passes to Missoula. How soon can we cross them?" A slow, approving smile touched the corner of Cole's mouth. "The snowpack is hardening. With draft horses, we can make it by Thursday. But Missoula is a rough town. Halo, Carmichael travels with hired guns, and Josiah is a cornered rat. You don't have to face him. I can ride down there, hand this wire to Marshal Emmett Tillman, and have Josiah strung up for attempted murder by Friday." "No," Halo said. Standing up, she dropped the crumpled telegram into the fire and watched the edges curl and burn. "He stole my dignity. He stole my home. He left me to freeze. I am not sending a proxy to reclaim my life. Cole, I want to see the look on his face when the ghost of his wife walks through the door." Over the next 3 days, Cole taught her exactly what she would need to survive the coming confrontation. He didn't offer her useless platitudes. He handed her a short-barreled Colt .38. He taught her how to check the cylinder, how to brace her wrist, and how to aim for the center of mass. He taught her that hesitation on the frontier was the difference between breathing and bleeding. When Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear, the Bitterroot Valley looked deceptively peaceful. Halo mounted a sturdy bay mare, her jaw set against the biting wind, a heavy buffalo coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Cole rode beside her on Goliath, his Winchester resting easily in its scabbard, a silent vow of protection radiating from him. They rode east, down out of the mountains, following the carved-out tracks of the Northern Pacific Railway into the heart of Missoula. The town was a chaotic, muddy sprawl of timber and brick, teeming with miners, railroad workers, and men looking to make a quick, dirty dollar. Halo's heart hammered against her ribs, but the steady presence of Cole beside her kept her tethered. The hunt was on. The Grand Central Hotel in Missoula stood as a monument to quiet power, where wealth spoke softly and violence hid behind polished contracts. Inside a private parlor, Josiah Miller lounged in a leather chair, a glass of brandy in hand, dressed in a sharp new suit that reflected his freshly claimed fortune. Across from him, Harrison Carmichael slid a stack of property deeds across the table. His voice was smooth, empty of feeling. "A tragic loss," he said. "But everything is now legally settled." Josiah bowed his head, performing grief with practiced ease. "I tried to save her," he murmured. "The storm, it took her. And now," Carmichael replied coolly, You walk away debt-free. Sign, and it's done. Josiah reached for the pen, greed flickering behind his eyes. He had won, his debts erased, his past buried. Then a voice shattered the moment. I wouldn't sign that. Josiah froze. Slowly. He turned. Halo stood in the doorway, alive. Gone was the fragile woman he had abandoned. She stood strong, wrapped in a heavy coat, her eyes blazing with something unbreakable. Behind her loomed Cole Remington, silent and dangerous, his hand resting near his weapon. Josiah's face drained of color. That's not possible. Halo stepped forward, her boots echoing across the room. You left me for dead, she said coldly. But I survived. She met his gaze without hesitation. And now, she added, her voice steady and final, I'm here to settle the rest. Carmichael stood up, his face a mask of calculated irritation. What is the meaning of this? Who are you? I am Halo Miller, she said, her voice ringing clear and steady. The rightful owner of the Missouri estate you are attempting to steal. And that man, she pointed a gloved finger at her trembling husband, is a thief, a coward, and a murderer. Carmichael looked from the furious woman to the terrified, sweating man in the chair. The truth was immediately apparent. Carmichael was a criminal, but he was a businessman first. A forged signature on a dead woman's deed was one thing. A stolen deed from a living, very angry woman standing in a room with a former federal marshal was a liability he would not touch. Mr. Miller, Carmichael said, his voice dropping to a freezing whisper. He began gathering his papers, shoving them swiftly into his leather briefcase. You assured me your wife was deceased. The Reynolds Syndicate does not deal in contested properties, nor do we abide amateur fraud. Your debts remain, and the interest has just doubled. Wait, Harrison, wait, Josiah pleaded, lunging forward. I can fix this. Give me a week. Carmichael didn't look back. He tipped his hat to Halo as he briskly exited the parlor, leaving Josiah entirely alone with his nightmares. Josiah turned back to Halo, his chest heaving. The arrogant facade was gone, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling reality of his character. He dropped to his knees, clasping his hands together. Abby, please. I panicked. The storm, it was monstrous. I wasn't thinking straight. I was going to come back for you. I swear to God. You took the matches. Josiah, Halo said softly, the words hitting him like physical blows. You took my coat. You emptied the lockbox. She reached inside her heavy coat and pulled out the short-barreled Colt. The metallic click of the hammer, cocking, echoed like a canyon gunshot in the quiet room. Josiah screamed, covering his face and curling into a ball on the floor, weeping openly. Don't please, I'll leave. I'll never come back. Just let me live. Halo stood over him, looking down at the man she had once promised to love and honor. She felt the heavy weight of the gun in her hand, the trigger slick against her finger. She thought of the agonizing, numbing darkness of the cabin. She thought of the ice in her veins. It would be so easy to pull the trigger. It would be justice. But as she looked at him, weeping in a puddle of spilled brandy, she realized he wasn't worth the bullet. He wasn't a monster. He was just a pathetic, hollow man. Killing him would tie her to him forever. Halo slowly lowered the hammer and dropped the gun back into her coat pocket. You aren't worth the gunpowder, she said, her voice laced with absolute disgust. Just then, the heavy footsteps of Marshal Emmett Tillman echoed in the hallway, alerted by the commotion. He stepped into the room, his tin star gleaming. Cole gave the marshal a brief nod, handing him the forged deed and the telegraph wire. "Josiah Miller," Marshal Tillman growled, hauling the weeping man up by his collar. "You're under arrest for grand larceny, fraud, and the attempted murder of your wife. The magistrate in Helena is going to have a field day with you." Josiah didn't fight as the heavy iron cuffs were slapped onto his wrists. He looked back at Halo one last time, his eyes pleading, but she had already turned her back to him. Later that evening, the snow began to fall again, a gentle, quiet dusting that blanketed the town of Missoula. Halo and Cole stood on the boardwalk outside the telegraph office. She had just wired her bank in St. Louis, halting the foreclosure and securing her father's legacy once and for all. "You could go back, you know," Cole said, his voice a low rumble beside her. He was leaning against the wooden post, watching her intently. "The trains will be running east by next week. You have your estate. You have your money. You don't have to stay in this frozen territory." Halo looked out at the rugged, snow-capped peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains in the distance. A month ago, they had looked like a tomb. Now, they looked like home. She turned to Cole, looking up into his pale, steady eyes. She reached out, her gloved hand resting gently against the heavy wool of his chest, right over his heart, the same heart that had pounded against her ear and kept her alive in the darkest night of her life. "Missouri is a place for polite drawing rooms and fragile things," Halo said, a soft, genuine smile finally breaking across her face. "I think I prefer the cold, as long as I have a good fire to come home to." Cole's hand came up, his rough fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. He smiled, pulling her gently against him as the snow continued to fall. "I reckon I can keep the hearth burning. Darling, if Halo's incredible journey of survival and frontier justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share her story. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the thrilling, untold romances of the Wild West. Drop a comment below, would you have forgiven Josiah, or let the blizzard take him? Thanks for watching.